Compromise of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act, and the Dred Scott decision preceded the secession of the southern states. Last week we talked about Henry Clay and how he helped everyone get along after Missouri wanted to enter the Union as a slave state. The compromise let Maine enter as a free state to keep things even in the Senate. Now it's 30 years later in 1850, and the same thing happens again, and the North and the South are arguing about slavery. It's in the middle of the California gold rush, and so many people have moved out west that California was ready to become a state. The Mexican-American War had just ended, and Texas is ready to become a state. California wants to be admitted as a free state. Texas wants to be entered as this enormous state. I mean, look at it. It's huge. Ew, it's gross. The Utah Territory and the New Mexico Territory were organized with popular sovereignty. Sovereignty! The Utah Territory and the New Mexico Territory were organized with sovereignty. Okay. Now I forgot the other one. Popular sovereignty. Nope, that's what the other one was. Sovereignty. Oh, sovereignty. Why can't I say? The Utah Territory and the New Mexico Territory were organized with popular sovereignty. No. Sovereignty. 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 Come on. Sovereignty. Okay. The Utah Territory and the New Mexico Territory were organized with popular sovereignty. Yes! Thank you! Oh, good heavens! Popular sovereignty means that each state is able to vote on whether or not they wanted to be free state or a slave state, instead of being told by the federal government. In this compromise, the Utah Territory and the New Mexico Territory were admitted under popular sovereignty, so they could decide on their own. Part of the compromise was for Texas to drop its claim to land north of the 36.5 parallel to let New Mexico have the land to the west in return for $10 million from the federal government, so that Texas could pay off its huge amount of money they owed. Texas had a big price on their head. Slave trade was abolished in the District of Columbia, but not slavery itself. The Fugitive Slave Act was strengthened. This means that if a slave escaped and went to a free state, the slave owners could go get them and bring them back. Also, if someone was hiding escaped slaves, they could be thrown in jail. Because of the Compromise of 1850, civil war was avoided, but just barely. Many historians believe that, if not for the Compromise of 1850, the United States might not be so united. Since the North was not that concerned with slavery in 1850, if the South had seceded at that time, the North would probably just let them secede and become the Confederate States of America without a fight. But during the next 10 years, the North became more determined to end slavery. Several things caused this to happen. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe published an anti-slavery novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin. It was about a slave named Uncle Tom, and it told about the terrible reality of many slaves, and had a theme that only Christian love could overcome something as bad as owning other humans as slaves. This book was crazy popular and was the best-selling novel of the 19th century. The only book that sold more copies was the Bible. This book angered the defenders of slavery, but it also caused many people who didn't give much thought to slavery to become very active and against it. In 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act created the territories of Kansas and Nebraska. Duh, I'd never guessed that. The purpose of the Kansas-Nebraska Act was to open up thousands of new farms in the Midwest and make it possible to build the Transcontinental Railroad. The two states were allowed to enter the Union as under popular sovereignty. This pretty much did away with the Missouri Compromise that said states would be added in pairs of free and slave states. Because of the popular sovereignty clause in the act, people from both sides of the slavery issue came rolling into Kansas to try to convince the settlers to vote for their side of the issue. Things became violent when John Brown and his sons came to Kansas, determined to kill anyone who spoke in favor of slavery. There were several terrible battles that are now referred as Bleeding Kansas. In 1857, the Dred Scott v. Sanford case made it to the Supreme Court. Dred Scott was an African slave living in a free state who tried to sue for his freedom. The Supreme Court decided that since he was brought to the United States as a slave, it didn't matter if he was free or not. He was not an American citizen, and he could not sue anybody. What sue mean? But they really didn't want criminal. It wasn't like illegal. You could take them to court, and they'll say like, decide if that's really worth suing, really worth paying you.
Right. And if you sue somebody, they usually don't go to jail. They just have to pay you money or have to go fix what they messed up.
You can't sue the government.
Well, you can. If the government does something wrong to you, then you can sue them.
So that means I can take the president to court? Man, whoa, man! I'm gonna do that every day, man! And Trump's gonna have to pay me $50 billion! And you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna tear down the house and blame it on Trump. And sue him. Why is everybody blaming Trump?
They don't like it.
I don't get it. They're saying you got vote too much for no reason. Or stuff. They just take him to court, they say. The Dred Scott decision said African slaves were private property and had no claim to freedom or citizenship, so they did not have the right to bring suit in a federal court. It also said that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional and that the federal government could not decide whether or not a state was free or not. It also said that the government could not give freedom or citizenship within the Northwest Territory to non-white individuals. All they care about is looks back then. They're so stupid. I hate this period of time. After the case, Dred Scott and his family were given to Henry Taylor, who was the man who convinced Dred to sue in the first place. Henry Taylor then permanently freed the Scott family. Unfortunately, Dred Scott died of tuberculosis 18 months later. These and other things that happened had the North and the South furious with each other and would soon cause the Civil War. As I said earlier, the Compromise of 1850 was probably why we are the United States we are today. If the South had succeeded in 1850, the North would have either just let them leave or they would have fought, and likely lost to the South. But because the war was avoided for 10 years, it allowed the North to become much more industrialized and ready to fight. This means that they were better able to supply and equip the Northern Army due to more steel production and better railroads. I hope you have enjoyed these facts about the Compromise of 1850 and Henry Clay. Click over here to go to the playlist of all the other videos in this series. Click over here to subscribe. Comment me if you saw the cat. Bye! Love cat! Cat! Whoa!